Welcome all, and thank you for joining us here on this live event that will address the issue of building leadership capabilities for second layer professionals. My name is Mark Ryan. I'm Principal Advisor to the CEO at Deakin Co, and I'll be moderating today's session. Deakin Co is the executive education arm of Australia's Deakin University. Joining me today are Mr. Abhilash Mishra, the CEO of NSE Academy, and my CEO, the CEO of Deakin Co, Mr. Glenn Campbell. I might just add that we're extremely pleased to announce that earlier today, Abhilash and Glenn signed an agreement that will see our two organisations partner in the promotion and delivery of executive training programs in India. We might get straight into the questions that are on the agenda today. So, gentlemen, let me start with the first question. Why is second layer or middle management important for business growth, and how should they be prepared for future leadership roles? Gentlemen, perhaps Abhilash, can I ask you to respond first?
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here on this conversation today. I think the second layer or the middle management cadre of any organisation is responsible for executing and furthering the mission of the entire organisation under the leadership of the senior management team. It is but important that this layer prepares itself for the future that is emerging at a very rapid pace. The senior executives today in organisation at CXO levels would assume larger responsibilities in different geographies, functions and organisations within the group or outside. And it is important that the second layer prepares itself, and it's also imperative that the management themselves and the CXOs themselves groom and mentor and train and guide the second layer of the executives in the organization. So number one, for the purpose of furthering the mission of the organization, because you are part of the same organization for a long time, and furthering the mission and the culture. Second is for the purpose of business continuity. It is very important that the second layer prepares itself, and the senior team and the boards also guide and mentor the second layer of leaders in the organization.
Thanks. And look, I'd add to that as well. You know, part of what we're seeing around the world is this growing complexity of the operating environment that we're in. You know, we've probably, particularly after 2 years of COVID, all heard of the term VUCA, and where that complexity comes from and how that impacts on our organisations is really changing the focus of more of our senior leadership team, and that requires that middle level management, that second tier, to start to step up and also look holistically across the business from looking at looking through the lens of how do we improve the performance of the business overall, and that's a critical part that they need to play to support their leadership team and help drive, as Abhilash said, the growth within the business.
If I may add one more part here is that as senior leaders grow further in the organization and they look at more strategic aspects of business, somehow they find themselves detached to the ground level realities. I think the second layer and the mid-management layer are more closer to customers, more closer to the ground realities, and as they develop their own skills, maybe this knowledge gets transferred from senior executives to mid-layer executives, and I think the bilateral exchange of information and knowledge is much faster.
Thanks, Abhilash. Thank you both. On to the second question. Many people think or consider that data is the new oil in the modern world. That being the case, what does the CEO expect from second layer staff in terms of database understanding and capabilities from which they can draw insights and recommendations for C-suite and CEOs?
Yeah, if I can start there. Data is, again, increasingly important in an organisation. Part of that is being the complexity in the operating environment, the larger organisations that we're seeing, increased competition from both within the sector, but importantly and critically from outside the sector. Data gives us so much insight into what's going on, whether that's in the organisation, with our client, buyers, the government. The important thing, one of the most important things, is to understand how we're collecting the data, why we're collecting the data, and how we analyse the data. So there's an old adage of garbage in, garbage out. And if we don't start really at the end game of what do we want data for to make decisions, and then we work ourselves backwards to what data we need. If we do it the other way, we can, in many ways, miss the trees because of the forest. We collect so much data and forget why we wanted it, and we start to go off track. So it's important to know why do we want it, and this is a critical role for those middle managers to understand from their knowledge of the business, the clients, the supply chain, how do we need that data and how do we use it to help inform decision making.
Thanks, Glenn. Abhilash?
Sure. So I would give it a perspective here that there are, in a business environment, the lead indicators and the lag indicators. A lead indicator is information and data. If the management and the team is able to, number one, identify the right data sets, cluster them into right segments, use tools for analysis and interpret them, then it is a good exercise to predict the environment going further. At times, for example, consumer behavior, suddenly you see product adoption or sales dipping because there is a set of customers who are not happy with the certain product attributes or the process or the experience at the time of purchase or simple checkout. If right data is tracked, interpreted on time and corrective measures are taken, then these lag indicators of dripping sales or customers getting lost in the entire process can be managed in a much better way. So my understanding is that at any level in the organization, appreciation of data and the basic understanding and knowledge to interpret data so as to make predictive analysis and assess not only the same function but allied business functions, the complementary business functions, and also the senior management is a very important skill that at any level of organization an employee has to develop.
Thank you very much. Post-COVID, a new term has emerged to describe the current landscape, given the immense uncertainty created by the COVID, the global pandemic. That term is BANI or BANI, and it stands for brittle, anxious, non-linear and incomprehensible. How can middle managers look to ignite and promote innovation in such a world? Gentlemen.
You want to start?
I'll start. I think first is, for those that are new to the term BANI or haven't heard it before, I think an explanation is required. So VUCA, of course, is volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. And VUCA has been used to describe the environment in which we operate in. Well, BANI is used to describe the impact that the operating environment may have on our business going into the future. So you can sort of see one is about the here and now, that's VUCA, and the other is about the future impact, which is BANI. And they go hand in hand. The value of understanding those and adapting and responding to them is really critical. And we saw that during COVID. We saw the rapid adoption of technologies, particularly as our physical premises were closed. What we need to be able to see more of is that level of innovation to how do I respond to a significantly changing environment? How do I respond at a viable price point at scale? The innovation lens for managers and anyone within an organisation is increasingly critical to help adapt and change to the way that the world is impacting on our businesses.
Thanks, Glenn.
I think this entire, the new learning that we had during and post-pandemic is that the adoption rates are so fast, the information flow is so fast, and why this anxiousness or brittleness or fragmentation of market post the VUCA environment is because organizations themselves, while in the pandemic we all went out of the way to actually find out new ways to do business, be it learning, be it work from home, be it technology, transform information flow. The fact that information flows so fast now, and now that we have seen the world in the last 2 years, the consumers themselves are looking for better, cheaper, and faster ways to do business and consume. So the two stakeholders in this entire process are organizations who have to manage the expectation of customers who got used to a new way of living the world. And what we see today is, what you look at the quiet resignation piece of people resisting to come back to work because the workforce has realized that the same amount of work or better work or productivity can happen even if they are outside the office. While organizations feel that now that they have discovered the way that business could be done better, can we exponentially grow it while people can have a blended way of working too. So till the time we find a balance happening, this tug of war may keep happening between VUCA and BANI. And but as I said, the eventual stakeholder is the consumer. Organizations are custodians of the expectation of the consumer, and the senior management, and more importantly the middle management, which is somewhere trying to manage both the expectations of their own teams and consumers, and also the management of the expectation of the board and senior executives, have to play a very important part in this entire transition period.
If I can add to that, that issue of returning to the office, I know is probably more of a challenge here in India than it is for us back in Australia. But one of the things that I think this very topic and around VUCA and BANI and the complexity that we've faced is to be able to rethink what the purpose of an office is. So if we look at innovation, innovation is best done in teams, in groups, in collaboration. It's something that is not generally best done by yourself. It's the sounding board and the generation of energy and excitement and possibilities of all of that comes together when we come together. And that could be one of the critical parts of why we need to come back to the office. It may not be, and that's not all the time, but it's a critical part for it. I think one of the other valuable things that I've certainly seen is the complementarity of India and Australia. Australia is very adept at innovation and entrepreneurialism and coming up with new and innovative ways of working or undertaking functions and tasks. But the thing we can't do in Australia is scale. Australia's population is the size of Mumbai. It's a much bigger country. It's a big country, but the population is very, very small. One of the most sparsely populated countries in the world. But that partnership, what India does exceptionally well is scale, because you have to. And I think there's some possibilities there to be able to learn from one another in how do we bring that innovation from Australia to India, and how do we bring scale from India to Australia.
Great point. In fact, I wanted to add, I think the anxious part in BANI is also for the fact that people in the last 2 years during pandemic were out of the environment of the office. And office is also coming together of minds, motivation, the social fabric that develops when you work with colleagues.
Yes.
In addition to work, you develop formal, informal friendships. And there's a lot of stuff that happens in the office environment for personal growth and learning, which working in a remote environment alone in front of a PC in a room might be very, very difficult. So I think the entire anxious part, also my interpretation could be, is also that there's a lot of challenge on the mental health of professionals these days.
Yes.
And I think organizations and individuals both have to take the necessary steps to ensure that our mental health and physical health stays in shape so as to meet the VUCA and the BANI environment going forward.
Thanks, Abhilash. I think you've made a very important point there. If I may come straight back to you, Abhilash, what is your mantra, what is your philosophy for motivating yourself and indeed your team?
I think, and probably this comes with age or with time or experience. Most people discover very early in life who they are. I think maybe I took some time to discover who I am really, but most of my reflection comes from feedback from my family, from my friends and my colleagues. I think my biggest motivation for me is jump-starting the day every day, coming to work, is of the mission that the organization has. And bringing in the financial education closer to every part of society, right from K-12 to working professionals. I think that personally for me is a huge motivation. Second is working with a super energetic, supercharged team that we are very fortunate to work with. The brand that we represent, the National Stock Exchange, is a leader in its space, a well-respected brand, and a huge legacy of bringing technology to financial markets in India, and as a world leader today, as the largest derivative exchange and the largest exchange in the country. I think these are the three top reasons: the mission, secondly our teams, and the brand that I work with. In addition, could be also motivating yourself to be fit, stay healthy, have the right kind of food. I hope I could take more breaks, but this is super fun, and I think that's how I keep personally motivated myself. I think would like to share the same thing with my teams, is to have a mission, work together, work as a team, and support each other.
Thank you, Abhilash. I think some wonderful messages out there for the audience. Glenn, can I ask you your thoughts on what motivates you, and how do you motivate yourself, and indeed your team? What's your approach?
So, like Abhilash said, it's, for me, one of the critical parts is understanding me. You need to be able to understand yourself. How do you work? What are your drivers? What are your passions? How do you like to receive information? How do you like to interact with people? What is it about you that makes you you? That's really crucial. To be able to understand yourself enables you to understand others. If you miss that step, you will miss understanding what's happening with your workforce. The second part is really when you, in working with any team in a leadership role, I really do go by a mantra of openness, clarity in what our purpose is. I also love being able to work in an environment where the mission, the vision, the purpose of the organisation aligns with my own values. And I think historically it's something we probably haven't done or seen as important throughout history. But our younger generation are also after that. I remember being on a panel in Australia, I think it was just before COVID hit, and I was asked the question of what word of advice would you give to someone that was finishing high school and thinking about their future career. And my advice was to follow your passion, follow what you believe, because the world is so different now that you can do that. But coming back into that workplace, you need to be open. Your staff need to understand who you are. So, as an example, I am a visual learner. I like to see things in graphs, in diagrams, in dot points. I love mind mapping. Now, a lot of people don't like mind mapping, but that's how I absorb information. And my staff need to understand that, because if I get a 14-page brief, I'm going to struggle to read that. And I think actually any executive is going to struggle to read a 14-page brief. Keep it to 2 pages, no matter what it is. But my staff need to understand that. But at the same time, I also need to be able to work with them if they're struggling in that environment, because as a leader, you need to be able to adapt your style to your team. And that's in some ways, a balancing act. But the more open and honest that you can be about yourself, about the organisation, and there are always things we can't tell our workforce, that are around confidentiality, future strategy, but be as open as possible as you can. Even when we have complex staffing issues, we know that we can't go into the details of an individual circumstance, but you can set the scene about how you respond to those sorts of incidents before one comes up, or remind people after one has happened. It's that level of honesty and openness that then builds trust, and that builds the sense of purpose and vision, and everyone can move in a concerted forward or aligned direction, and that they know that you value them and therefore they value you.
I think that's a very important point of you mentioned about being honest and being open. I think in the last 20 years we've seen the human part of leadership, which has really stepped into the organization, is that sense of vulnerability that leaders can have. You don't have to be a degree apart from the team. You are part of the team. and if you share the same emotions of joy or challenge or setbacks, but you work together, I think it brings the mutual trust that you mentioned. It's a very strong part of it. It can only happen if you're open, if you're vulnerable, and you share the same joys and same disappointments together.
That's right. Because trust it's not something you can really describe how you get it. It happens in some ways, but you absolutely know when you lose trust. And so these are the sorts of things that we work on to make sure that we actually build that trust up, because it's not a right to receive trust of your workforce, it's a privilege. And that privilege rests with you first to understand yourself, understand and communicate the vision to the organisation, and be open and honest, and that brings the trust and the performance of your organisation.
Thanks, Glenn, and thanks, Abhilash. Again, I think some excellent insights there into the important elements of leadership, indeed. Next question. How can C-suite executives instill and develop strategic mindsets among their middle managers?
I think it's a task and important responsibility of any senior executive to pass on their learnings and transfer of knowledge to the second layer of command in the organization. To develop those strategic mindsets in the middle management, I think it's important for the senior management. Number one, identify those individuals in the organization and within the structures whom they think, depending on the strategic issues that they are managing and facing, and they could be handpicked to be involved in the strategic design or the strategic challenge or the strategic focus of the organization. Once this experiential learning path sets in, then complement with formal education, which can be provided through coaching, through mentoring, through executive education, professional sponsorship to programs to leading universities, business schools, or executive education providers. And third is, once they feel that after let's say the shadow the CEO, step is done, the formal education and the support has been given, is to now give them responsibilities to handle projects, handle assignments, which actually use these skills, the practical and the theoretical skills that have been provided to the individuals. And I think that is the path that I would recommend. And every organization, in fact, every senior leader should take up to them the responsibility that eventually when they move forward in life, they have to prepare the next layer of leaders within the organization. And also, it's important that when the second layer of leadership understands your language, understands what you are thinking, what is your assessment of things going to be like, they not only become sounding boards, but also they can counter and question your own thinking at times. At times, in varied situations, that hubris may set in within the senior leadership. There might be a myopic viewpoint of the function of the business or the broader worldview as such. It is good to have some trusted lieutenants along with you who have been groomed and mentored and coached in the timelines to corroborate, question, counter, or act as sounding boards to you as you take those decisions.
What can I add to that? Look, I think just as, if we think back, and I'm going to change this in a slightly different direction, if we think back to when we started our careers, there was always someone there to mentor us, to show us how things are done. And I think we tend to forget that as we move up an organisation, we still need that. And just as the CEO and the leadership team need to impart their knowledge, their experience, down to their direct reports, so too does middle management below, and that keeps flowing down. But at some point in the life of organisations, we've sort of forgotten that, and we need to come back to it and bring that level of sharing and helping one another that is so prevalent in sort of more junior roles in organisations. When I think about what are some of the really critical things that I need, and I think anyone really needs in their their second level, it's things like being able to think strategically, think across the organisation, understand the impacts on an organisation from within and without, to increasingly being digitally fluent, understand what new technologies are coming out, what are their applications, both within your industry and outside of it, and being able to be a great people leader. And we talked about that a little bit earlier around what, understand yourself, and then you can lead your people. And it's, as we come up into that second tier, it's no longer about just working in a vertical. You now have to work in the vertical and the horizontal. And that's a critical change for that second tier that is partly and a big part the responsibility of the leadership team above, but also their awareness that that's what's required in that role. And those critical skills around how do we lead across the organisation, the innovation actually and digital fluency come hand in hand. A lot of our innovation is being driven or enabled, is probably a better word, enabled by technology. That's in many ways the difference between being a great second tier leader and being one that isn't.
Terrific. Thank you, gentlemen. Abhilash, you mentioned earlier part of the journey is education, executive education, upskilling. I mentioned earlier that the Deakin Co is partnering with NSC Academy in that very space, and I would note that the first initiative in that partnership, we have 4 boot camps. They're 3-day intensive boot camps that are currently, will be being marketed by NSC Academy. Amongst the 4, they really address all the issues that have been spoken about today. The titles of them, Think Like a CEO is one. It's pretty much self-apparent. The focus of that boot camp, business intelligence with data and AI, interpreting self and team leadership, and finally strategic thinking and driving innovation. So as you can see, addressing very much the issues that have been discussed today. Glenn, you've actually designed all of these boot camps, all of these programs. So perhaps can you give an overview or an idea of your sort of philosophy in terms of the experiential elements of the programs and how you approach and what you think these programs potentially can offer?
No, thank you. And I think this is one of the reasons Abhilash and I started talking about this actually just before COVID. Yep. And COVID got in our road. But with each of the programs, the philosophy that I have, and I'll just sort of take that back a step. Whilst I work in a university, I've spent half of my career outside of the education sector, working, if you like, in the learning space within an organisation. So that's the first lens that I bring to the way we design our corporate learning and professional development. We look at it from a continuous learning approach. We look at it about how are those, if I just took something like strategic thinking, how do you change the way you teach and experience strategic thinking at different levels in an organisation? So the approach that we take is highly experiential. That's how we get to actually absorb and practice and change our actual behaviour. The first part of it is, of course, to learn new material. We can learn, we can read, we can have conversations, but we have to experience it. And that's where the value comes in. And so with the programs, and I'll take Think Like a CEO as an example, we actually look at 4 critical skills of thinking like a CEO. But we also bring in live challenges. So challenges that are really being faced by organisations. So it might be, for example, digital transformation. And we get the participants to look at digital transformation through the lens of each topic. And the reason we call it Think Like a CEO is that we're also after them to be able to effectively be the CEO and make board level presentations, so that they're making a presentation on what they see as being the right organisational response to that organisational challenge. And they have to look at that through firstly to help build up that skill of problem solving and innovation through the lens of each individual topic. But the program culminates with a holistic presentation at board level to a panel of directors and CEOs and other senior leaders from across industry, both industry in India and also in Australia. So that's the value of having that experiential journey. And the other programs go more in depth into given topics like data and data analytics, digital transformation, innovation. So again, what we're doing is there is material to learn, there's case studies to learn from, there's interaction with the faculty, but importantly, there's those experiential elements for the participants to be able to take that information and go, okay, how does this relate to my job? How does this relate to typical examples of challenges being faced by every business in the world?
I'm glad you mentioned that, Glenn. In fact, the discussion that happened 2 years back, and last 2 years we have worked together to create this entire journey. I think the program that we have designed, while they are modular, but they actually fit into each other very well. You know, one may pick up one particular module and still be sufficient, but if you mix and match these modules, it becomes a full-fledged journey. For example, you know, business intelligence and data and AI. Even when you look at interpreting self and team leadership, a topic like that relies heavily on the information and the data provided to you. Unless you have those points mapped out in the life cycle of the team or your own personal growth and development, you will never be able to have the right information to interpret who I am. You know, it's like if I need to lose weight, I need to probably walk 10 kilometers every day for next 1 month. But if I don't map it out, if I don't use those data points, how many hours did I walk, how many steps did I take, what's my diet intake, I will never lose weight. Similarly, that self-interpretation is also based heavily on data and AI. Second is strategic thinking and driving innovation. Innovation is a question posed today, looking at the future while interpreting the past. This is how things worked out. How should we do them better? How can we innovate to make them faster, cheaper, and better for the consumer? And how we can disrupt the entire ecosystem? That can only happen if you have the right information data sets and you not only understand yourself and the organization. And then the last topic, which is think like a CEO. Before you hit the pool and you take that big, lessons in swimming, you need to learn to float and you need to learn to breathe properly. So if your aspiration is to become a CXO tomorrow, in the next few years, that these are the modules which will help you start floating, give you the right rhythm to breathe, and then when you hit the pool to become the CXO, you'd always be prepared.
That's right. We give everyone that chance to try in a safe environment before they do the real thing in their own organisation, and that's a really valuable element towards what we do. The other thing I might just mention is that we also introduce tools that are tried, proven, where we see them as benefit. So we're not going to bombard you with a whole lot of tools. We're going to narrow that down and focus in on them so that, yes, they're not the only tool. And in a lot of areas, such as understanding self, there's a lot of tools out there. But at the end of the day, most of them achieve the same purpose. So we look at something that is easy to use, easy to understand, that you can take away with you and use in your everyday life. What are the triggers that make you anxious? What are the, there's a tool that we do use in the personal self and personal leadership program that is a fantastic tool, and it's one that I actually use regularly myself because I need to know when I'm in the here and now. And mindfulness is one of those tools, but there are other tools, and we use another one which is a simple self-assessment to give you a sense of where almost are your triggers. So if you're feeling anxious, you can then go, it's one of these three things. Let's see how I can now focus on that and bring myself back into the centre.
Excellent. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Abhilash. That almost brings us to a close today's session. Before we do wrap things up, on behalf of the audience, I'd like to thank Abhilash and Glenn very much for their thoughtful and insightful comments today. I think there are some have been some tremendous learnings in the discussions today. So I'm sure you out there have enjoyed the discussion as much as I have. And also finally, on behalf of Deakin Co, I'd love to thank yourself and your team at NSC Academy for hosting us here today, and we certainly look forward to developing a wonderful partnership in the executive education space for the BFSI sector and indeed beyond. So finally, for those out there, if there is any interest in some of these boot camps that have been discussed, please reach out to NSC Academy. Beyond that, we wish you a good day, and that's goodbye for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jen. We are very excited about this partnership. Thank you for your time today.
Pleasure. Thank you.